The cameras still know how to find him, even when he is trying to disappear. A bright suit, the familiar smile, the same easy handshake that once made an arena feel safe. But lately the smile arrives a fraction late, like it has to travel through something heavy before it reaches his face. At 66, Magic Johnson can sit in a luxury box while thousands chant, and yet the loudest sound in his world is often the soft click of a pill bottle in the early dark, the kind of sound that does not care how many championships you won. Every day begins with a small negotiation. Not with the world, but with his own body. A careful breath at the edge of the bed. A pause to see if the joints cooperate, if the lower back will loosen, if fatigue will let him stand without paying interest. The public sees the empire, the boardrooms, the ownership stakes, the polished interviews. His mornings remember 1991, when a single sentence turned applause into fear and made a legend feel radioactive in the sport he helped electrify. Back then, the truth did not unfold gently. It dropped like a trapdoor. One day, he was still the pulse of a dynasty. The next, he was a question nobody wanted to answer out loud. Could he come back? Was it safe? Would you share the floor with him? In a league built on contact, the most painful blow was not a defender's elbow. It was the hesitation in a teammate's eyes, the half-step backward, the quiet reordering of the room around him. People talk about tragedy as if it is a single event, a headline, an ending. But the kind that breaks you the deepest is the kind that keeps going after the headline fades, the kind that makes you rebuild your life while the world keeps studying your ruins. Magic did rebuild spectacularly, and that is where the story becomes cruel in a new way. Because wealth does not cancel fear. Influence does not quiet the night. The most heartbreaking chapter of his life is not that he lost basketball. It is that even after he proved he could survive what people thought would kill him, he still had to learn, again and again, that there are storms no success can stop from reaching the people he loves. A phone call in the middle of the night has a different gravity when you are a parent, because there is no amount of money that can buy back a second of time if the voice on the other end is shaking. He has stood in hallways where no banners hang, waiting for doctors to step through doors that refuse to open, discovering how small he is when the only thing that matters is whether a child will be okay. He has held his family close after moments of terror that do not care about fame, moments that strip a household down to breath, to warmth, to the unbearable relief of survival. And through it all, there is the private weight of being watched. Not admired, watched. As if the world has been waiting for his story to end the way it once expected. As if every year he lives is a contradiction that needs explaining. That kind of attention is its own prison. It can make even joy feel cautious, like you are celebrating on borrowed time. It can make you measure happiness in smaller units, in ordinary days that you learn to treat like miracles because you remember what it feels like when tomorrow is no longer promised. The tragedy is not that he had to change. The tragedy is the cost of changing in public, under a microscope, while also trying to remain a husband, a father, a man who has to wake up and choose discipline on days when discipline feels like the only thing left holding the walls up. You can hear that discipline in the way his life is described now. Precision, routine, no room for carelessness. The same focus that once turned a fast break into art, now turns survival into a schedule. The same mind that once read defenses now reads the quiet signals of pain, of fatigue, of stress, of the body asking for rest it does not have time to take. And still, he shows up. He shows up at events, at meetings, at games, at family dinners, at hospital rooms, at the hard conversations that cannot be delegated. That is what makes this story hit so hard. Not because it is hopeless, but because it reveals how fragile even the strongest people are when the spotlight turns cold. Magic Johnson was built in scarcity, sharpened by judgment, crowned by victory, and then pushed into a kind of loneliness that trophies cannot touch. At 66, the tragedy is not that he is broken. It is that he has had to become unbreakable so many times that the world forgets to ask what it costs him when the cameras are gone and the room is finally quiet. Long before the world learned to call him Magic, before banners and contracts and cameras rewrote his name in a legend. There was a boy named Irvin Johnson learning how quickly dignity can be tested when poverty is visible. He grew up in Lansing, Michigan, in a house stretched thin by necessity, where 10 children shared space, warmth, and a constant awareness that survival required cooperation. His father worked punishing hours at a General Motors plant and then drove a garbage truck before dawn, while his mother scrubbed school floors until exhaustion followed her home like a shadow. What stayed with him most was not hunger alone, but the sound of her breath when she returned at night, a quiet signal that everything she had was already spent. On weekends, riding beside his father on trash routes, he learned another lesson that would harden early. It was not the cold that hurt most, but the way neighbors looked at him, the whispers, the laughter sharpened into a name meant to stick. Trash boy. It followed him home, followed him to school, followed him into silence. At 7 years old, he carried a question that would never quite loosen its grip. Why does doing what is right still make you feel so small? By his early teens, that feeling grew heavier. School integration sent him to environments that made it clear he was present but not welcome. The bus rattled under thrown stones. Inside locker rooms, conversations died when he entered. On the court, the ball sometimes never came his way. Coaches looked past him instead of at him. The message was quiet but complete. You can stand here, but this place is not yours. That kind of exclusion teaches a specific kind of discipline. Either you disappear, or you build something so undeniable that the world has no choice but to acknowledge you. Before sunrise, while Lansing slept, he chose the second path. At 5 in the morning, he slipped onto empty concrete courts, winter burning his skin, breath rising in pale clouds. There, no one questioned his right to exist. The court did not care where he came from or what names chased him. It only demanded that he show up. Every insult, every cold stare, every night spent staring at the ceiling poured into the rhythm of the ball. Dribble, step pass again and again. The no-look passes that would later amaze millions were not born from showmanship. They were shaped by necessity, by a young man carving out space where he could not be dismissed. At 15, something cracked open. In a dim high school gym thick with dust and old wood, he erupted for a stat line that did not belong to a teenager. 36 points, 18 rebounds, 16 assists. A local reporter stared at the numbers and whispered a word that would never leave him. Magic. When he told his mother, her response steadied him rather than lifted him. That kind of power belongs to God, she said. The name became both promise and pressure. Celebration arrived braided with fear. What if it made the laughter louder? What if it gave people something else to take? Loss soon sharpened him further. In 1976, his closest friend and teammate, Reggie Chastain, died in a car accident at 18. Magic was 17. The call emptied the room of sound. Reggie had been shelter, the first person who saw him without labels, who stayed after practice when others drifted away, who said you matter when the world suggested otherwise. Losing him split time in two. For weeks, Magic stood before Reggie's empty locker, fingertips pressed to cold metal, whispering promises into the stillness. Grief did not soften him. It fixed something in place. When Everett High won the state championship the following year, he raised the trophy toward the rafters not in celebration, but as a vow. The next climb began at Michigan State, under practices designed to break players who had not already been broken by life. By the time the NCAA finals arrived in 1979, with Larry Bird on the other side, he was not playing for noise or headlines. He was playing for memory, for the boy on the empty courts, for the friend whose belief still echoed. When he entered the NBA that same year, at 20, fame did not greet him with warmth. Veterans murmured that he smiled too freely. Critics dismissed his joy as gimmick. Beneath it all, the boy who once prayed for invisibility recognized the precision of doubt landing again. The league thought it was measuring him. It was sharpening him. Then came the night that sealed his legend and foreshadowed its cost. In the 1980 finals, when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar went down, Magic did not hesitate. On the flight to Philadelphia, He sat in Kareem's seat, a quiet decision that told everyone he understood what was being asked. He had never played center, but under championship pressure he became everything at once, delivering 42 points, 15 rebounds, 7 assists, 3 steals. Cameras caught the grin. What they did not capture was the payment. Years later, he would remember his legs shaking, counting breaths, learning that greatness arriving early demands interest immediately. The decade that followed crowned him the conductor of an era. 5 championships, 3 MVPs, 9 finals, 12 all-star selections, and the league growing brighter around his presence. But brilliance collects its toll in silence. 82 game seasons, red-eye flights, bodies colliding, cameras that never slept. Some nights he lay on the locker room floor, staring at the rafters, whispering a simple request. Just let me stand tomorrow. The smile hardened into armor. People celebrated Magic, he would later say, but the part of him called Irvin learned how to be quiet. By the late 80s, he stood at the summit, adored and seemingly untouchable, while beneath the shine a fracture formed that no spotlight could reveal. A shadow was already moving closer, patient and unseen, toward a life trained to endure pressure and about to face a test no arena could prepare him for. And when that moment descended in 1991, it did not just interrupt a career. It reached backward through everything that had shaped him, turning survival into something far more complicated than winning ever was for Magic Johnson. The room was not loud when it happened. There was no heckling, no roar, no sudden chaos to match the weight of what was about to be said. On November 7th, 1991, Magic Johnson stepped to a podium expecting routine questions and delivered a sentence that bent the air around him. Because of the HIV virus that I have attained, I will retire from basketball. For a man who had survived roaring arenas and last-second pressure, the silence that followed was the most violent sound he had ever known. Pen stopped mid-stroke. Cameras trembled. The words did not land as illness. In that era, they landed as a verdict. In 1991, HIV was not understood. It was feared. It was whispered about, as if saying the letters too clearly might invite it closer. Treatments were uncertain. Myths traveled faster than medicine. To the public, the announcement did not sound like a diagnosis. It sounded like an ending. Overnight, the man who had turned basketball into joy became a question mark wrapped in anxiety. Broadcasts cut away. Radio hosts stumbled over the same sentence again and again. Locker rooms across the league froze. The sport he had illuminated suddenly spoke about him in the language of risk. Headlines hardened. Commentators wondered aloud if he should ever return. Some players quietly admitted they would not want to share the floor. What hurt most was not outrage. It was hesitation, the half-step back, the pause before a handshake, the subtle rearranging of space that told him everything had changed. Inside the Lakers organization, confusion replaced certainty. Teammates who had lifted trophies beside him now reached out and pulled back, unsure where the boundary lay. Trainers hesitated. Coaches lowered their voices. In the locker room that had once been sanctuary, his jersey hung untouched, shifting slightly with the air, like something already being remembered rather than worn. Only days earlier, he had been the pulse of a dynasty. Now, he felt unmoored from the one place that had always made sense. I believe the game would always be there, he would later say, choosing his word with care. And then one day it wasn't. What cut deepest was not applause fading, but purpose dissolving. The sudden absence of the court that had carried him out of poverty, ridicule, and isolation left a vacuum that no amount of fame could fill. He tried to step back into that world. In early 1992, the league invited him to the All-Star game. It was meant as reassurance, as a bridge back to something familiar. Under the lights, he delivered 25 points and won the MVP. The arena surged as if witnessing renewal. For a few hours, fear loosened its grip. But even that night carried an edge. Behind closed doors, objections circulated. Talk radio flared. Columns questioned judgment. When he attempted comebacks later that year, and again in 1996, the murmurs followed him through tunnels and hallways. Is it safe? Should he be here? Each step reminded him how quickly admiration can tighten into caution. Being feared by the sport, he had once made joyful cut deeper than any defender ever could. The final attempt to remain close to the game arrived quietly and ended the same way. In 1993, he tried to stay within the Lakers' orbit as head coach, hoping proximity might restore something he had lost. Instead, it unraveled. Losses accumulated. Players no longer saw a leader shaped by the present, but a figure tied to another era. After 16 games, it ended. No ceremony, no farewell, just the realization that the game had continued without him. Standing outside the world he once ruled, he confronted a truth sharper than defeat. Success cannot shield a life forever. When the spotlight steps away, what remains is not applause or fear, but the quiet work of choosing how to stand, how to adapt, and how to move forward one breath at a time. The collapse was not slow. It was public, unforgiving, and complete. Yet what the world missed was this. When Magic Johnson lost the game that had raised him, he did not lose the fire that kept him moving. After 1991, as headlines sealed his story and fear tried to shrink his future, he chose a path most men avoid. Rebuild without pleading. Rebuild without waiting. Rebuild by hand. He returned to places others had erased. Through 1993 and 94, long before titles like Mogul followed his name, he walked neglected blocks of Los Angeles alone, past cracked sidewalks, boarded storefronts, theaters sinking under dust. They felt familiar. Not broken, just ignored. He was not chasing profit. He was searching for meaning. In bank offices, his community-first plans were waved away. Revive theaters. Relight local business. Anchor forgotten corners. These neighborhoods won't work. Stick to sports. The market isn't there. Each refusal pressed like a hand, tried to push him back where the world preferred him. Every no felt like a nudge toward a door he had already fought to leave. Still, he kept walking into empty storefronts, sitting in torn seats, picturing projectors warming the dark. With no map and no guarantees, he wagered the one asset he trusted, himself. The restored Baldwin Hills Theater was not glamorous. It was alive. Families returned. First paychecks were earned. And in that modest success, he learned a hard truth. Sometimes the first victory after losing everything is proving you can stand. The surge that followed rewrote assumptions corporate America had never bothered to test. Could a global brand thrive where it had never looked? Magic did not hesitate. Absolutely, he said. You just haven't listened yet. He invested millions of his own savings, money he could not afford to lose, knowing belief would be tested by consequence. Failure would have confirmed every doubt thrown his way. Faith carried him forward. Cafes opened and anchored neighborhoods. Sales surged. Lines wrapped the block. People came not only for coffee, but for dignity and safety. When he exited one major partnership years later with $75 million in cash, it was not fortune. It was conviction paid back. From there, the enterprise expanded with intent, reviving blocks, creating jobs, restoring dignity, and extending into finance and sports ownership. Each step bore lessons learned in darker rooms. Invest where others look away. Measure success by who rises with you. Looking back, he framed it without flourish. Basketball made me magic. Losing it taught me who I was. His empire was not assembled from applause or trophies. It was built from rejection, discipline, courage, and the belief forged in the darkest nights that a broken chapter does not end a life. It can become the beginning of something stronger. By the time the business headlines began to replace the sports pages, many assumed the hardest part of Magic Johnson's story was over. The public prefers narratives that move cleanly from collapse to comeback, from loss to triumph, as if rebuilding wealth automatically repairs what was broken inside. But while boardrooms slowly replaced locker rooms, another reckoning was unfolding far from cameras and contracts, one that no amount of capital could soften. It lived at home, in the quiet spaces where identity is stripped of performance and a man is measured not by what he produces, but by how present he is when it matters most. Long before he was forced to leave basketball, Magic had already lost something he did not know how to name at the time: proximity. His rise happened too fast for a young man still learning how to anchor himself. When his first son, Andre, was born in 1981, joy arrived tangled with fear. He was 21, pulled between global fame and private responsibility, trying to balance a life sprinting ahead of his emotional maturity. While his calendar filled with games, flights, endorsements, and expectations, Andre's early years passed mostly without him. There were birthdays he missed, first words he never heard, small moments that do not announce themselves as irreplaceable until they are gone. Years later, Magic would speak about that period without defensiveness, only regret. There are parts of his childhood I can't get back. That stays with you. That absence settled quietly, unresolved, even as success multiplied. Life, in rare mercy, offered a second chance. Andre grew into a grounded man, shaped as much by resilience as by legacy, and over time, father and son found their way back to each other. Not quickly, not easily. They rebuilt deliberately, conversation by conversation, presence replacing apology. Today, Andre stands beside his father not just as family, but as a trusted leader within his business world, proof that reconciliation is possible when humility leads. Yet even as one wound began to close, another chapter opened that would test Magic in ways basketball never had. After years of stops and starts, his relationship with Cookie Kelly had finally settled into permanence. In September of 1991, they stood before family and faith, promising a future they believed had slowed down enough to hold them. Weeks later, Cookie learned she was pregnant. Joy filled the house like light finally allowed to stay. Then, only 7 weeks after the wedding, Magic walked through the door carrying words heavy enough to bend a life. He had tested positive for HIV. In that moment, newlywed warmth collapsed into fear. For a pregnant wife in 1991, the diagnosis sounded like the ground giving way. Cookie did not know if she was infected. She did not know if the baby was safe. Overnight, hope was replaced by waiting. Waiting for test results. Waiting for answers. Waiting for a future that might already be closing. Outside, the world erupted. Cameras gathered. Headlines speculated. Strangers assigned blame. Cookie endured public judgment that cut deeply, accused of staying for reasons that had nothing to do with love. She stayed anyway, not out of obligation, but because she believed the vows they had spoken were not ceremonial words. When the results finally came back negative for both her and the baby, the relief did not arrive gently. It broke them open. They cried until there was nothing left to release. Survival, however, did not mean peace. It meant learning how to live inside uncertainty. Magic wrestled with guilt and the fear of dying young, of leaving his wife alone, of a child growing up without him. Cookie carried her own weight, too, protecting a family still forming while absorbing the cruelty aimed at the man she loved. Some nights they slept back to back, afraid to voice their worst thoughts. On others, they prayed together, promising to rebuild without knowing how. Slowly, painfully, they found footing. Doctor visits became routine. Counseling peeled back layers neither had known how to name. Cookie's steadiness became the anchor. Magic's vulnerability became the bridge back to closeness. The vows they had spoken weeks earlier shed ceremony and became survival. Looking back, Magic would offer words shaped by humility rather than pride. I don't know if I deserve her then, but I grew into the man she believed I could be. Their marriage endured not because it was flawless, but because they chose each other repeatedly when everything suggested they would break. As the years passed, fatherhood continued to demand evolution. In 2013, his son EJ came out as a gay man, choosing honesty over comfort. The room went still. Magic's fear was not about who his son was. It was about what the world might do to him. The sting of names, the memory of being singled out, returned uninvited. Cookie's response anchored him. This is our son. Love him first, learn him later. What followed was not instant clarity, but work. Magic listened more than he spoke. He asked questions shaped by curiosity rather than control. Certainty gave way to patience. Their bond deepened not through speeches, but through presence. Years later, Magic would reflect with quiet honesty that EJ did not just tell him who he was. He helped him become who he needed to be. Then came a night that stripped away every remaining illusion of control. In 2023, EJ collapsed suddenly and was rushed to the hospital. Magic paced corridors where no banners hang, staring at doors that refuse to open, discovering again how powerless success becomes when a child's life is uncertain. "Please let me trade everything for one more ordinary day," he would later admit. When stability finally came, relief arrived not as celebration, but as gravity lifting. And just when he believed he had learned every lesson fear could teach, another storm cut through the family. In December 2018, his daughter Elisa was staying at a friend's home when armed intruders forced their way inside. She escaped barefoot into the night, cold air tearing at her lungs, asphalt ripping at her skin, fighting only for breath. When Magic heard her trembling voice on the phone, something inside him fractured beyond repair. Championships dissolved. Empires fell silent. In the moment he wrapped his arms around her, shaking and alive, he learned a truth no arena had ever taught him. Strength is not always protection. Sometimes it is endurance. Sometimes it is standing still while fear moves straight through you. Fatherhood demanded something basketball never had: the humility to admit fear, the discipline to listen, the courage to accept that control is an illusion. And in those lessons, far from lights and applause, Magic Johnson continued to evolve, not as a legend, but as a man learning how to love without armor. By the time the noise finally thinned, what remained was not peace, but maintenance, the quiet, relentless work of staying alive inside a body that now carried history in its joints and consequences in its chemistry. For more than 3 decades, Magic Johnson has lived inside a private countdown the world once assumed no one could outrun. Every morning begins the same way, not with motivation, but with assessment. He sits at the edge of the bed and waits to see if his body will cooperate. Some days it does. Many days it resists. Joints grind like hinges that have carried too much weight for too long. The lower back burns in slow, unnegotiable waves, a residue of collisions, travel, and years of medication layered quietly into muscle and bone. On the nightstand, a small bottle waits. The cap opens at the same minute every day. Precision is not discipline. It is survival. One missed dose can send tremors through the system without warning, a reminder that progress is conditional and tomorrow is not owed. As the pill rests in his palm, memory pulls him back to a time when this medicine did not exist, when a diagnosis sounded like a deadline instead of a plan. "Every sunrise feels borrowed," he once said, shaping the thought with care, "so I try to receive each one like a gift." Night does not end the battle. It changes its shape. Pain does not knock. It settles. It creeps from the spine down the leg until even turning in bed feels like pressing into a bruised life refuses to let fade. Doctors give it clinical names. He lives it as persistence. Cookie hears the shift of sheets before he ever speaks, the long-held breath, the silence that follows. In the dark, her hand finds his chest. "I'm here," she whispers, 2 words that anchor him when medication twists his stomach, when sweat soaks the sheets at 3 in the morning, when sleep fractures into minutes. In the late 90s, nights often arrived in 90-minute stretches, pacing slowly on swollen ankles, standing in the darkness, asking the question every long-term survivor knows but rarely dares to voice. Will tomorrow ask for more than today? Pain, however, has never been allowed to speak last. Before the world wakes, gym lights snap on, cold and unforgiving, and he steps inside like someone returning to familiar ground. The treadmill hums, breath steadies, sweat gathers. Movement does not erase pain, but it refuses to surrender to it. Every mile I move is a mile the virus doesn't get to take from me. Cardio gives way to stretching, then weights, then a long walk beneath early light that feels like a private victory. People say he looks younger each year. He smiles, knowing every strong image is built on moments of weakness the world never sees. There are hospital rooms too, numbers etched into memory, each visit a reminder that his life is measured in markers most never have to learn. Still, he rises, not for applause, not for legacy. He rises for those watching quietly. The older fan waking up sore, the parent counting pills at dawn, the man afraid to say HIV out loud, the patient swallowing another bitter dose. Strength isn't the days you feel good. Strength is choosing to live on the days you don't. Championships made him a legend. Success made him powerful. Disciplined survival, practiced morning after morning, made him something rarer. As long as he wakes, takes that careful first breath, and reaches for the pill that keeps tomorrow possible, the fight continues, not for history or fame, but for life itself. And yet, survival alone is not the whole measure. As the years passed, he learned that endurance without structure can still collapse. He built routines not because they were inspiring, but because they were dependable. Wake on time. Take medication without compromise. Move the body even when it resists. Eat with intention. Show up for family even when fear is louder than confidence. Protect the quiet when motivation disappears. Hold himself accountable when no one is watching. He did not wait to feel strong. He behaved responsibly until strength returned. That quiet consistency became his lifeline. It also reshaped how he understood success. The man who once thrived on momentum learned to distrust it. Momentum fades. Structure holds. In boardrooms, his patience confused people used a spectacle. Capital to him was not a trophy. It was a tool that had to keep working quietly, long after applause disappeared. He favored assets designed to endure cycles rather than chase moments. Governance over glamour, stewardship over noise. The same philosophy guided his philanthropy. He did not disappear after the donation. He returned. He listened. He stayed engaged long after attention moved on. But the clearest measure of who he had become no longer lived in arenas, boardrooms, or headlines. It lived at home, in a marriage shaped by endurance rather than romance alone, in children grown and finding their own footing, in a steady presence that matters more than authority when fear outweighs fame. Public appearances continued, but the calendar bent increasingly toward health, family, and reflection. HIV remained a daily companion managed with discipline, a constant reminder that continuity is never guaranteed and only earned day by day. This is where his story settles, not in triumph, but in definition. He did not survive by chasing momentum. He survived by building structure. When basketball stopped, when fame became fragile, when health imposed limits that could not be negotiated, what kept his life intact were not grand decisions, but small ones repeated without exception. That is the quiet truth beneath the legend, the part that does not glitter. Discipline outlasts talent. Belief sustained by action outlives hope alone. And when progress is taken away, it is routine, patience, and the refusal to abandon principle that keep a life from collapsing. As the years advanced, another truth settled into place, quieter than pain, but heavier in its implications. Survival, even disciplined survival, does not freeze time. It only negotiates with it. At 66, Magic Johnson lives with an awareness most people spend their lives avoiding. The future is not a promise. It is a responsibility. This understanding has reshaped how he moves through the world, how he speaks, how he listens, and how he measures what truly matters when the margins grow thinner. Wealth, influence, and public respect did not soften this realization. If anything, they sharpened it. Because when you have seen how quickly everything can be taken, accumulation loses its seduction. What replaces it is intention. His life now is not designed for expansion at any cost, but for balance that can endure. Each commitment is weighed against health. Each opportunity filtered through family. Each public appearance measured against the quiet recovery it will require afterward. This is not retreat. It is calibration. The man who once thrived on speed has learned the discipline of restraint. He understands that longevity is not built by pushing harder, but by knowing when to pull back without guilt. That lesson has not come easily. There are days when frustration flares, when the body resists movement, when fatigue makes even simple tasks feel like negotiations. On those days, memory can be cruel. He remembers what it felt like to run the floor effortlessly, to impose will through joy, to feel physically limitless. The contrast can sting, but nostalgia is a luxury he does not indulge for long. He has learned that longing for a former body can quietly poison the present one. Acceptance, he discovered, is not surrender, is strategy. By accepting the limits imposed on him, he has preserved what still works. That philosophy extends beyond health into how he relates to the world watching him. For decades, he was a symbol others projected onto: hope, fear, controversy, resilience, morality. Early on, he tried to meet those expectations, to carry them responsibly, to be what people needed him to be. Over time, he recognized the cost of that performance. No one can live forever as a symbol without disappearing as a person. Now, he chooses his visibility carefully. He speaks when he believes presence can help someone else stand. He withdraws when attention offers nothing but noise. This shift has not dimmed his influence. It has refined it. When he speaks about health, people listen not because he is inspirational, but because he is honest about how unglamorous survival can be. When he speaks about discipline, it does not sound like advice. It sounds like testimony. He does not promise transformation. He describes process. That distinction matters. It allows others to see themselves in the struggle instead of feeling excluded by perfection. At home, this clarity has deepened his relationships. He no longer measures fatherhood by authority, but by availability. He knows now that children do not need a flawless example. They need consistency. They need to know someone will answer the phone. They need to know fear can be admitted without shame. These lessons were not learned in victory. They were learned in hospital corridors, in sleepless nights, in moments when control evaporated and only presence remained. Marriage, too, has taken on a quieter strength. It is no longer fueled by momentum or shared ambition, but by mutual endurance. By the understanding that love is less about intensity than about reliability when circumstances grow thin. This kind of partnership does not announce itself. It reveals itself slowly in habits formed under pressure and promises kept without witnesses. The public rarely sees this version of his life, and that is by design. He no longer believes meaning requires documentation. The greatest relief he has found in later years is the freedom to live without needing every chapter to justify itself to an audience. That freedom did not come from success. It came from loss. Losing basketball stripped away the illusion that identity can be anchored to a single gift. Losing certainty about his health stripped away the illusion that time is abundant. Losing control in moments of family crisis stripped away the illusion that power protects what matters most. What remains after those illusions fall is not despair, but clarity. He understands now that character is not revealed in peak moments. It is revealed in how a person behaves when progress slows, when the applause fades, and when discipline must replace motivation. This is the legacy he lives with daily, not as an abstract idea, but as a practice. Wake up, take the medication, move the body, speak honestly, listen more than you talk, show up where you're needed, rest when you must. Repeat. There is nothing cinematic about this rhythm. That is precisely why it works. It does not rely on inspiration. It relies on commitment. In a culture addicted to breakthroughs and dramatic turns, his life offers a quieter proposition. That survival is not a single victory, but 1,000 small choices honored without exception. That strength is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to keep living alongside it. And that meaning is not found at the peak, but in the steady ground you build beneath yourself when the climb is no longer possible. As he moves forward, he does so without urgency, but not without purpose. Time may be limited, but intention is not. And in that balance, he has found something that outlasts even greatness. He has found a way to live fully inside the life he still has, without apology, without performance, and without waiting for permission to rest. In the end, the story does not resolve with a victory parade or a final statistic that neatly closes the book. It resolves in something far quieter, far more demanding. It resolves in continuity. At 66, Magic Johnson lives inside a truth that most people only glimpse briefly, if at all. A life is not held together by peak moments. It is held together by what remains when momentum disappears and no external force is pushing you forward. For him, that realization did not arrive gently. It arrived through interruption. Basketball stopped. Fame became fragile. Health imposed conditions that could not be negotiated. The question was no longer how high he could climb, but how he would stand when climbing was no longer possible. What has carried him through is not optimism and not nostalgia. It is discipline refined into habit. Not dramatic discipline, not the kind that photographs well, but the kind practiced when no one is watching. Waking up on time, even when sleep was fractured. Taking medication without compromise. Moving his body on days when pain argued against it. Choosing patience over anger. Choosing presence over distraction. These decisions are small in isolation. Together, they become a framework strong enough to support a life that has been repeatedly tested. This is where his legacy truly lives now, not in arenas or boardrooms, but in example. Not the example of invincibility, but of responsibility. He does not pretend that surviving for more than 3 decades with HIV has been a gift without cost. He acknowledges the fear that still surfaces, the fatigue that does not fully lift, the awareness that tomorrow is never guaranteed. But he also refuses to let that awareness collapse into paralysis. He treats each day as something that must be earned, not celebrated prematurely. That posture changes how a man moves through the world. It strips away entitlement. It sharpens gratitude. It teaches restraint. In his quieter years, he has learned that meaning does not need amplification. It needs alignment. Alignment between values and behavior. Alignment between words and routines. Alignment between what he asks of others and what he demands of himself. This alignment is why his presence still carries weight. People do not listen to him because he once dominated a sport. They listen because he has endured a reality that cannot be outworked, outspent, or outperformed, and he has remained accountable inside it. There is a humility in that endurance that commands respect without asking for it. His life also leaves behind a question that is uncomfortable precisely because it is universal. Who are you when the thing that once defined you is taken away? When applause fades? When progress slows? When health, age, or circumstance redraws the boundaries of what is possible? For many, that question arrives too late to answer deliberately. For him, it arrived early and publicly, forcing a response under pressure. His answer was not to replace one identity with another overnight, but to rebuild slowly, guided by principle rather than impulse. He did not chase relevance. He built structure. He did not chase sympathy. He built routine. He did not chase forgiveness. He practiced responsibility until it reshaped him. This approach has allowed him to age without bitterness, without the need to prove anything to a world that once doubted he would survive it all. His confidence now is quieter, grounded in the knowledge that he has already faced the worst interruptions life could impose and continued anyway. That confidence does not seek validation. It rests in consistency, in the knowledge that he has honored his commitments even when they were inconvenient, painful, or invisible. As the years ahead narrow, his focus narrows with them. Health, family, stewardship, and rest. These are not signs of retreat. They are signs of clarity. He understands that legacy is not something declared at the end of a life. It is something built daily in how one responds to limits. His life argues that greatness does not end when the spotlight turns off. It changes shape. It becomes less about achievement and more about example, less about expansion and more about integrity, less about what you can do and more about how you live with what you can no longer do. This is the quiet lesson his story offers to anyone willing to look past the highlights. That survival is not heroic in a single moment. It is heroic in repetition, in the refusal to abandon discipline when motivation disappears, in the willingness to keep choosing responsibility when chaos would be easier, in the courage to live honestly inside constraints rather than pretending they do not exist. If there is a final image that defines him now, it is not a fast break or a trophy. It is a man waking up, taking a careful breath, and choosing to continue. Not because he is fearless, not because he is certain, but because he understands that a life held together by discipline, faith, and perseverance can remain meaningful even when everything that once defined it has been interrupted. And in that understanding, his most enduring victory quietly endures.